Hi, this is Chris Terrell. In this video, we're going to be looking at getting the basic setup so that you can get started creating your own macros. First thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding the developer ribbon. I'm going to take a look at macros, show you really quickly how to get started recording a macro, briefly look at macro security, take a look at the Visual Basic editor, change some of the options because one of them is specifically very annoying. We're also going to be creating our first code, our first procedure, and we're going to go back to view the macros just to kind of close the whole loop in. So first thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and add the developer ribbon. First thing, let's look at this. If we look at the quick access toolbar, that actually is this little guy right here. You can add or subtract. You can customize that ribbon. It's a really nice thing to do. I typically have my auto filters up there, just because it makes it quicker. But today we're going to add the developer ribbon. If you right click anywhere in this area, click customize ribbon, and you'll notice that by default the developer ribbon shows blank. Simply check that, click OK. You'll notice the developer ribbon shows up. You have a couple options here. We've got macros, so let's go ahead and look at this. This is going to show me all of my macros that are currently open within Excel. Now it will default to most likely with the last thing that you have selected, but you can select all workbooks. You can select this workbook, or you can select the name of that workbook, which typically this workbook and book 1 in this case are the same. And this workbook is just basically the easiest way. If you don't know what the name is or can't find it, or if you have a lot of workbooks open, that's a really great way to do that. One of the nice things about Visual Basic is that you're able to record macros. This is a really great option. We're going to get into looking at that later. But basically, when you click on this, it's going to start recording all of your keystrokes. And then when you click end, it's going to stop that. So if there's anything that you do as far as like cutting and pasting or any repetitive tasks that can be kind of boiled down to kind of the essence of what you do, a lot of times you can just record a macro and save yourself tons of time. The other nice thing is if you ever get lost and you really don't know kind of the verbiage or the syntax on how to do something, using that record macro is just remarkably helpful. And we'll do some videos on that. The other thing that we want to look at is macro security. This is the default. By default, it says disable all macros with notification. And you may or may not have seen that, but when you open up a workbook and it's a Excel a macro enabled workbook, you will have a little button that says enable content, and that's the default setting. You can actually turn off all macros. You can disable all macros except digitally signed macros. Now those happen to be pretty rare, and where you will find those is if you're working within a corporation that has a add-in that is maybe tied to a database or has some, it's tied into kind of some different enterprise level functionality. It is pretty uncommon. And then the last one is enable all macros. I do not recommend that. One, they don't recommend it, and yes, it can be very dangerous. So we're going to stick with our defaults for today. The next thing that we're going to look at is the Visual Basic editor. You can click on this button. You can also hit Alt F11. That's typically what I do. And this just shows our Visual Basic editor. A couple things. You do have a toolbar here. You can right click on this. I typically put all of these in, mainly because there's not that many that it makes it so confusing. For the most part, you're going to be using these ones, and then you're going to be using these ones, which are the run, the pause. You can stop your code. Alright, so we're going to get rid of that default annoying option. So if you click on Tools, you go to Options, we're going to uncheck the syntax check, and I'll show you kind of why that bugs me so much here in just a sec. The other thing that's nice about here is you have a format editor. So if you want to change your font size, etc., this is where you do it. If you want to do, these are some general settings. For the most part, the defaults are just fine here. And then you also have the ability to dock. And all dock means is it's going to show up this is docked, so this is docked below it, these are docked on the bottom. It makes your coding simpler. Alright, so we're going to dig in and we're going to create a sub, which is basically a set of code, and we're going to do this. We're going to call it my first macro, and I'm going to show you why that is annoying. You'll notice that turns red if the Visual Basic tries to compile that code and it sees that there's an error. It's going to turn that line red. Well, we unchecked that option, and I'll show you why. If I turn that back on and I come back to this row and I create an error, it's going to basically come in and say, hey, you've got an error, we've got this big error, and this is why. And I found those to be, at times they're informational, but for the most part it is just mostly confusing. So that is why by default I take that out. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, uncheck that, and what we're going to do is we're going to go MSG box, and this is just a message box, and this is going to be hello world. And we're going to do VB OK only. Now, OK only is going to just show one box. Just going to say you're going to have one button that says OK. Now you'll notice you've got OK cancel, you've got yes no. There's quite a few options in here, but for this case we're going to do that. We're going to put in, for the title, we're going to put in title, T-I-T-L-E. Now notice when I hit the comma, it shows that little box below. That's called IntelliSense, and what that does is it just gives you contextual help when you're writing your code. Now, you'll notice it gave me an error, and it took me a while to catch the error, but I was missing a comma right there. So I was able to figure that one out. Alright, so now we've actually got a code. This will actually run. It'll create a message box. If I hit this little play button, here, if I hit this play button, that's my code. It's going to say hello world. Now let's go back here. We're going to go back to our macros because we looked at these before and there was no macro, but now we have that macro, so we can come in here and we can actually click run, and it will actually run our macro. Hope this is helpful. Hope you enjoyed.